And welcome to the SEEP meeting for March. Jackie, we have apologies and substitutions, don't we?
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Hampton, the Chair, so as is usual, the Vice Chair will be in the Chair, which is Councillor Stonnet, has kindly agreed to do that today. We've had apologies also from Councillor Osborne. When we were rearranging the day, he was unable to attend this one, and I understand Councillor Champion is his substitute. We've had apologies from Councillor Vaughan-Thomas and Councillor Giles as his substitute, and we've obviously had apologies from Councillor Hampton and Councillor Stewart will be substituting as a member of the Labour group. Thank you. We've also got Councillor Packer in attendance, who will be attending for one of the reports on biodiversity.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Let's have a look then at the minutes of, beg your pardon, item 2. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Everyone had a chance to have a look at these, please? And can we agree these is the correct record, please? Care to indicate? Yes, people are nodding. Thank you. Great, thanks. So, let's move on to item 4, which is the Environment Strategy Team update. Hello, welcome. So if you care to introduce yourself. Have we met? I'm not sure we have. Have we? No, so I apologise for the fact that I can't introduce you.
Hi, Phil Hunt, right?
Phil?
Phil Hunt.
Hi, Phil.
Here we go.
Hi, Phil.
Hello, everybody. Phil Hunt is the name. I think I'm in week 8, so there will be quite a few people I've still yet to meet. I thought it would be useful. I'm still in the discovery phase of my joining of in the new role, but I've also hit the ground running. There was a really good quality handover, so I've been able to become effective pretty quickly. But I thought it would be useful just to set out the environmental strategy team, what we do, what's the scope of our activity, and some general thoughts on the way we're sort of knitting things together and moving forward. Does that sound like a... The restart's a bit annoying, isn't it? Snooze lecture there. So, yes, I thought the scope of the team activity. We are strategy leads for biodiversity, and I think that's a relatively new function in the team. And certainly there's a long history of leading on strategy development around climate change. And there's two sides to climate change: mitigation, i.e. how do we reduce emissions and impact on the environment, and how do we also adapt? What are the risks around our changing climate, which unfortunately is inevitable. And there's a paper later on from my colleague Rachel around some of that risk analysis work that we've been doing, considering how climate change is in the near future. We also lead on affordable warmth strategy, and never has that been more at the forefront of our minds, given the current increases in the cost of energy for all of us. But also deliver affordable warmth strategy, so we do the legwork of going out and engaging with members of the public to help them remain well and warm. And I think what's important, and what's perhaps been recognised as something to increase the amount that we do, is how we coordinate across teams and across directorates. So I very much see my job as a person who coordinates strategy, ensures that there's good coordination in the delivery of strategy, get out and talk to people right across the executive to make sure that there's integration and kind of cohesive delivery plans for the strategy work that we're putting together. It's actually pretty easy. There we go. How about that? I've been in sustainability for 22 years now, And in some of my previous roles, I've managed in something that I refer to as an ISO 14001 environment. And ISO 14001 is the international standard for environmental management systems. And what I'm bringing to the work that my team does is a structured approach to developing an environmental management system. We do by default have an environmental management system because we're managing environmental stuff. But I'm bringing what I hope is some useful experience around the way that we manage that data, communicate, coordinate, the way that we understand our environmental risks and opportunities, how we put in place training and that sort of thing. It's just there's more discipline brought to that kind of process of environmental management. So that's something that's happening across the piece. And my team. So Rachel, who's been absolutely fantastic, thank you for being so great in my first few weeks and helping me settle in well. And also my predecessor, Richard, who was good enough to come after I joined a few weeks into the new role and did a great handover. So I really appreciate that. Currently recruiting a carbon management program coordinator. So the team is in growth is the important point here. And had a question mark on that new role, on that new person, but actually Martin was recently interviewed and has accepted our offer. Will be joining us on the 4th of April as carbon management program coordinator. Very much kind of project delivery role, understanding where carbon emissions are coming from, and managing projects to energy efficiency, renewable energy projects to manage our emissions down. And we have funding for more posts. Still in the sort of decision-making process about exactly how we, what functions those new posts are meet. So watch this space. We will be recruiting soon for more people. And I just also wanted to summarise the policy and strategy development work that's coming up in this year. Most of this is set out in the corporate plan, and you'll be familiar with it. The one piece that isn't there was a piece that has been identified as missing, which is a succinct statement of our environmental commitments. And really it's one and the same thing as a policy statement. And this was identified by a really useful piece of work that was done by a consultant from the East of England Local Government Association. There was a piece of gap analysis work done, and that's been flagged as something that we need to put together. It's been drafted. And I'm just going to pop through in the order that we're actually doing them in. The new biodiversity strategy and action plan is also coming together quickly. A draft of that is circulating amongst my colleagues, and we will be putting that forward in June of this year. The environmental action plan, net zero by 2030 carbon management plan. So yes, later in the year, in November, an updated affordable warm strategy. So lots of pulling together, lots of coordinating of our plans and strategies. I also just want to offer a reassurance. It's not just about strategy and plan development. Of course, there's lots of implementation thinking going on at the same time. We're also integrating, recognising the need for really good join-up. So around retrofit, the need to integrate with the asset management strategy, the understanding the need for subordinate strategies to biodiversity, such as trees, etc. New parks and open spaces strategy. So lots going on, and I just wanted to give a little summary of those pieces of work. And I think this is my final slide. It's pulled out of the commitment statement. And what I'm driving at here is that there's so much opportunity beyond just environmental protection and enhancement. We will need a step change in the way that we do things, in bringing about a retrofit programme, in bringing about enhancement to our biodiversity. So some other opportunities. There are commercial opportunities, there's opportunities around job creation. So I'm looking to maximise the benefit, the economic benefits as well, and to join up with our other strategy colleagues in ensuring that we maximise benefit across the piece, not just environmental. I think that's my last slide.
Thank you.
I'm new to this. Are there questions now?
Yes. So thank you, Phil. And this is an update, so we're not being asked to make any decisions here. And Phil's, I think he said in week 8, so let's be nice and gentle with him. Can I take any questions to Phil on the presentation? Denise.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Phil, very much. I wanted to ask you, Phil, you raised this yourself in your presentation, which was very helpful, to how the environment strategy team will work across the council to ensure that strategy, policy developments, implementation, support climate change and biodiversity mitigation, and you mentioned working with colleagues. I wondered, for example, will you as a team be commenting on other strategies from other parts of the council? So that's my first question. My second question is, will the council seek opportunities for joint working with neighbouring local authorities wherever possible to scale up the impact of policies? For example, one of the environment strategy actions is to investigate the potential for conservation cuts. But that's more likely to get off the ground if the City Council works with neighbouring districts and the county to find a single site for composting and the cut hay, for example. So that's just one example. And then I wanted to ask finally about the City Council's policies having a rippling effect across the city. And one example I'm interested in hearing your views on is how the City Council's new waste strategy can help create the pathway to a local, low-carbon circular waste economy. Because we often talk about a circular economy, but there doesn't seem to be a pathway for actually steering it across the whole city and steering it with local businesses. So thank you very much.
I wish I brought my pen and paper now, but I think the first question was around working across the council with colleagues. So to answer that specifically, in the nearly 8 weeks that I've been here, what I've done is undertaken a mapping exercise to understand where I can influence, understand the functions in other teams and across the directorates. And I've produced a map. I've actually written it on my whiteboard. It's quite big now. And so, yes, there is. I recognise that it's really important to, first of all, find out where all of the people that I need to speak to are to bring about cohesive strategy development and therefore cohesive action. And there is an acceptance that there is consultation between the teams on strategies. And I haven't put it in here because I could do a presentation that went on for quite a long time. I have an evolving strategy map that looks at the dependencies between strategies so that we can be effective, essentially. So I hope that answers question 1. Question 2 was, remind me.
They're working with
district council. Yeah, I mean, as part of the environmental management system approach, I'm developing an interested parties register, which has several tiers, starting with neighbouring local authorities, but it's also pretty much all interested parties, registered housing providers, for example, Wildlife Trust. It's probably at the moment got about 60 or 70 interested parties on it. And depending on the strategy and activity that we're developing, some of those interested parties will come more to the fore than others. But yes, we acknowledge that partnership working is important, and as indeed, as you pointed out, was set out in the environmental strategy 2025. So yes, we are pursuing that. And the final question.
Final question. I'm particularly interested in hearing how the City Council's new waste strategy can help create a pathway for developing a local circular waste economy, please.
It's a level of detail I have yet to get to. I mean, I acknowledge, and I'm pretty sure I understand circular economy, and personally, I understand that there is ecology, that the natural world presents limits to growth, and the way to manage growth is to start to have a circular economy, that we need to start reusing. End-of-life pathways is a phrase that comes to mind. We need to be defining end-of-life pathways that aren't landfill across the piece, but I can't comment specifically on the waste strategy. It's just something I haven't got around to yet. But I acknowledge circular economy is an important component in the work that my team does.
Thank you, Phil.
Yes, it's week 8. It's week 8.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Ian and then Kate.
Thank you, Chair, yes, and thank you, Phil. We haven't met before, but this is our first committee together, so welcome. Also, welcome to Martin. Yes, yeah, welcome to your role. So the question is about the other jobs that we're going to have in the department. Have you had a chance to look at those job descriptions in detail yet, and how do you see those panning out, please?
I have yet to. I've reviewed existing job descriptions. So, for example, previously there was, I think, a 0.4 FTE of an officer grade job description. Am I allowed to ask my colleagues to remind me things?
Of course you can.
So what I'm looking at, I'm looking at roles, I'm looking at functions that need to be filled, and actually there's quite a few of them. There's probably more than we have funding to deliver. But that said, I think given the amount of work that needs doing this year and the amount of time it takes to recruit, actually having the budget that we've got, I wouldn't be able to spend it any more quickly anyway. So it enables, the budget that's allocated post-April is sufficient to develop this policy and strategy work and to really get us moving. But I've yet to get into the detail of job descriptions. But I acknowledge that there are, the roles that we're looking at are around biodiversity, action planning and delivery, and around engagement, and around carbon data collection and planning of carbon projects. And that's my current thinking, but that's yet to be consolidated.
Okay, yes, thank you for encouraging words, Jamie. I think actually the other question has been covered already, so thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was wondering where our arm's length companies fit within the strategy.
Sorry, I can hardly hear you.
Okay. I was wondering where our arm's length companies fit within the strategy, if that's something that you've had the opportunity to get to yet. Basically, they'll be responsible for implementing policy and strategy.
Yeah, very much so. So I understand this is a time of significant change, and that the council is planning to manage activity through contracts with wholly owned businesses, and of course they are, it's critical that we reach those at every level of every organisation that we engage with. And so the environmental commitment policy statement is written for colleagues, members, agents, consultants, contractors. So the intention is that we do reach everybody who's acting for us, including in those arm's length companies. Does that answer your question?
That's good. Gary.
I appreciate you've only been here for 8 weeks. If it's any consolation, I'm the newest councillor here, so I'm learning the ropes as well. I've been going through some of the notes from previous meetings just to make sure that I was up to speed on this. I was particularly interested, in the past, there's been references to the 2040 vision, the Norfolk Business Climate Leaders Group, and they've been referred to. I'm wondering if their objectives link in with yours, and what level of accountability have we got to ensure, I appreciate you said you understand circular economy, and that's fantastic, but what accountability do we have that the council will follow your vision and your lead in regard to this? If that's an articulate question, I don't know.
I think I can answer around the Climate Commission. The Business Leaders Group is a group that I don't yet understand the terms of reference of. But I think I'm right in saying, and I've met with the Climate Commission, and I've set out pretty much what I've set out to you today with a little bit more detail around carbon specifics, retrofitting. But my understanding is that they are an independent organisation. I have asked them for their assistance in our efforts to decarbonise the city. And I've set out the challenges that exist for the council and what the roadmap to decarbonisation looks like. And yes, I have, in broad terms, asked how they might be able to act to help us, and that's with them to consider. But my understanding is that we don't manage their agenda. We're sort of facilitating their.
That's right. I can. Yeah, that's right. I can come in a little bit on some of that as well. So absolutely, they're an independent group. Obviously, we are supporting them through a secretariat at the moment to make sure that they can form themselves effectively and develop an effective work programme. And the sort of the oversight of that sits with the overall City Vision Board, which again is obviously includes ourselves, but various other organisations across the city. So that has all sort of flown through that City Vision process, and we are, it is acting as an independent group. But as I say, we have obviously influence on that, and we are in conversation with them, and will continue to be so. We can't necessarily control what they're doing. That's not the purpose there. Just on the business leaders group, I've had a little bit more interaction with them than Phil would have done. And again, I think they're still they're linked into the Climate Commission and they're linked into the City Vision Group. They are still forming their plans, as I understand it. There is a group there. There are a passionate group of people there. They're still forming their plans, as we understand it, in terms of what they want to focus on. But I think the focus there particularly has been how they can support businesses to find a path to net zero for themselves. That's the particular focus for them, as I understand it. But as I say, I think they're in a fairly early process as well.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, I've got another question. I was also wanting to clarify for myself the affordable warmth strategy. Does that then link in with what were we saying here? With the retrofitting strategy? Are they linked together? The retrofitting strategy and the affordable warmth strategy?
Only that they're sort of co-beneficiaries of each other. Was it the heat strategy?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. The heat strategy is something that I've recognised the need for since joining. And no, they're not so closely linked actually. So the heat strategy will describe how heat will be provided in the city as we transition away from the use of gas. And it actually ties in with a piece of work that we're involved with at the moment through BAYS, the government department. We're taking part in a pilot study for the heat network zone regulations, which are being developed at the moment. And this new set of regulations aims to be able to identify urban areas where the government will deem heat networks, essentially great big underground district or community heating systems, to be the most viable source of providing heat. So we're in a data kind of collection and analysis phase of that project with BAYS. And it's really one and the same thing. All of that information lends itself to a heat strategy for the city. And so the heat strategy will describe how we produce heat without gas, in simple terms. And actually it relates more to the Norwich standard for building homes. So the Norwich standard, which will also be strengthened this year, is my understanding, and I've had a discussion with the officer who's managing that. So we're looking to find a kind of optimum point around energy efficiency, cost, etc. Drawing on the experience that has been gained through building high-performance houses in the city recently. But that strategy begs a heat strategy. We will always need some heat, and how will we produce that? So the heat strategy looks at the river as a heat source. It looks at community heating systems. It looks at ground source, air source heating, and that sort of thing. But it's turning its head away from gas.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. It's early days, a couple of months, and you've got a huge agenda. So we look forward to working with you in future as you start firming that up, and you've got further things to report to us and discuss with us. So thank you very much and welcome. And welcome to Martin as well. What's Martin's second name? Simons. Martin Simons. Yeah. Okay, let's move on then to item 5, which is a report of the progress on the installation of an air source heat pump at City Hall. Exciting. Who's going to present this, please? That's Martin.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Just want to introduce myself. Around 11 months ago, I started with NPS Norwich, and part of the project that I was given was to install an air source heat pump in the building we sit in at the moment, City Hall. Fortunately, we'd applied for some central government funding, which we were successful with, and with that we were looking at, on top of the new boiler that had been installed recently, was to have a low carbon heating system within City Hall. We looked at several locations, and obviously with it being a listed building, a lot of places it couldn't be put, but it was decided eventually that the roof was suitable, but that came with its restrictions because obviously you don't want something very high on the roof that you can see from the castle at the moment, because there's going to be tourists on top of the castle. So it was restricted to a certain height, so we then had to look for, we were limited to the number of models we could look at, and we had to get structural engineers to look at the weight on the roof, but eventually, after a lot of planning, and we managed to get it through procurement, we are now at the point where we are installing the air source heat pump. And I don't know how familiar you are with the building, but if you look in the courtyard, there's some scaffolding up at the moment, and I apologise if there has been any noise disturbance, but you can blame me for that. But yeah, the scaffolding's up there, and on Monday, the road at the front of the building will be shut as well, so unfortunately more inconvenience, but that's for a crane to deliver the air source heat pump steel work that it's going to sit on, because we didn't want it to go directly on the roof, because structurally it wouldn't hold the weight. But yeah, the crane is coming on Monday to deliver the steels, and then later in April we've got another crane lift, and that will deliver the air source heat pump. These air source heat pumps will be the primary heat source. So we have a new boiler. We had some old boilers that were very inefficient, so we installed a new boiler to give you an example of figures, the old boiler was working at maybe as little as 70%. The flues were very blocked. When they took the flues out, you know, they were clogged up, they were failing. The two boilers they had, that was replaced by a new efficient boiler, which they're predicting with the right controls will work at about 108% efficiency, whereas the old boiler was maybe as low as 70%. The air source heat pumps will be the primary heat source, so the gas boiler will actually work as a backup. They'll deliver around 43% of the building's heating and hot water throughout the year, so that'll have a carbon saving of around 120 tonnes, so the air source will be powered completely with renewable energy, so that's a big saving there as well. But yeah, that's where we are at the moment with it. And all being well, and hopefully it won't be too windy on Monday, our crane lift can go ahead, and the same in April. And yeah, we hope to complete the install by end of May.
That's really, really good news. Great project. I want to ask one really dumb question, which is, how can you have 108% efficiency?
Well, when I looked at that, I was reading the manual actually of the gas boiler that came in, and it's just the control strategy. Phil may be able to.
So it's a European method for calculating that assumes that the gas is
Asking you.
Oh, sorry, can you put your mic on?
Thank you.
It's a European method for calculating efficiency. And it maps 108%. It's pretty much the theoretical maximum of efficiency. It maps to about 92% in our common sense approach to thinking about efficiencies. But it's to do with what's notionally lost through condensation is recovered. And the way the Europeans count that condensation portion is in excess of 100%. It's very counterintuitive. But 108% is about 92% efficient, which is as efficient a gas boiler as you can get.
I'll go with 92% then.
92%.
Sorry, I got that from the manual.
That's okay. That's the way they do it.
I'm sure others were thinking that too, but thanks for that. That's really helpful. Any other questions? Obviously, we welcome this greatly. Gary.
I'm sorry.
There it is. So I was just going to ask, in relation to, is it local contractors that we're using to install this?
Yes, they are. They're from Bury St Edmunds actually, so reasonably local. Yeah.
That's good to know.
A lot of the guys live in Dereham actually.
And so, are any of the skills and knowledge, are we able to transfer those? Is this going to be an exemplary project that we can then transfer skills from what's happening here and knowledge into the wider community to allow other people? Are we going to use this as a springboard to encourage other businesses or buildings to replicate what's happening here, or to upskill people?
I think we can certainly, when it's been installed and working, and we can show the savings through meter readings and such like, going forward, I'd like to think, yes, we can pass that knowledge on. As it is, I've not got any plans. I only joined, less than a year ago, so I've sort of been thrown in installing it. But yeah, that's going forward. That's certainly something we'd look at.
Okay, thank you.
Judith.
I think what Gary was probably getting at was some sort of communications programme to let people know what's going on, so that they can look to City Hall listed building, having achieved that, and the price tag that comes with it, and then to say, well, what can we do as an ordinary household? I mean, air source and ground heat pumps are fairly common now, and I think people are just put off by the by perhaps costs and the lack of knowing that other people are doing it. If you see someone installing, you are curious about it because it's a curiosity rather than a regular thing. It's not seen in new build, unfortunately, very often. You look at these new houses, you look round and you can't see anything. so I think when you do see someone installing one, you're curious about it. And I think the more you demystify the fact, if City Hall can do it, albeit with a grant and all the difficulties that come with it with a listed building, then surely we can get something going and, in ordinary households.
Yes,
I think
I think with the cost of electricity will come down and gas will go up, and they'll sort of meet, long term in the middle. So that will encourage people to use, renewable energy, electricity rather than gas going forward. So I think that will be a big positive to having an air source heat pump. That'll be very sellable. And the technology's come on a lot the past few years. So the energy you're getting, where with electricity, with gas, you might get 1 kilowatt in, not quite 1 out. With the air source, 1 kilowatt of electricity, you're getting up to 4 now out. So, they are a lot more efficient. And I think with the price of gas will keep creeping up. Using an electrical, renewable solution will be the way forward, definitely.
I think in terms of communications, you're probably asking the wrong person, and asking the project manager. Actually, it's a wider issue for the comms team more widely, and I am absolutely confident that we will be making a big deal of this. But I think you're right. That will help people. It'll help to normalise it. I don't know if you're aware of the theory of the 100th monkey. You heard that? No. So basically, it's about behaviour change. And it's about how, basically how you get to a tipping point where, at a particular point, and this is the 100th monkey, out of a number, you say 150, you get to a tipping point where that 100th one does it, and then everybody flips over to do it. So you've got really, really slow progress, and then you get to a tipping point where people recognise it as being normal and something they want to do. And so the more we can contribute to that, the better.
Yeah. Can I just say, I think it's that's a good sort of principle perhaps, but I think it's going to be the price and availability of energy that makes people change, and that is outside of our control. But it's pushing us in the right direction.
It is, yeah.
Unexpectedly.
But and the payback times for the investment, in solar panels and things like that are so long, and it's up to government really. We need to make grants available and invest, but we can do our bit, which we are. So I saw Ian, and then I saw Gary again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's always worth remembering. Actually, we have solar panels on the roof as well, so there is some additional benefit from these. I know that the installation has been met by a grant, £625,000, which is excellent news. So it's not cost the city directly, and it's been compared here with the carbon reduction approximate to planting 5,000 trees. Which is also very good. But have we costed the savings that we're likely to create in monetary terms against the old boiler?
So this is financial savings you're asking about, Ian? Okay.
Yeah, I can answer that. Initially, there won't be any financial savings. This project isn't to save money, it's to save the environment. So with the cost of electricity and gas where they sit at the moment, it works out almost the same cost. But going forward, I'd like to think, as gas prices will come up, the way things are looking, that there will be a cost saving. And, we've erred on the side of caution. I think when we've run it a year and we get meter readings, especially with the new gas boiler as well, which has only recently been installed, I think there will definitely be cost savings. But we're erring on the side of caution at the moment until we get those meter readings.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is a strategy project rather than a direct cost savings.
Good, that's a good question. Thanks, Ian. Phil. Sorry, Phil.
I just wanted to put it in context. I'm pretty familiar with engineering in Norwich. I was previously at UEA. I wouldn't mind betting this is the largest retrofit air source heat pump in the city. And given that it's on a Grade 2 listed building, as you say, we've overcome a number of barriers to make it work. I think it's a really good example of the council acting as leader. There is a comms plan coming together. We have regular, one of the first things that I set up was a regular meeting with the comms team, and we have a comms business partner. So we have functional comms going out next week around the crane lift, where we plug the benefits of air source heat pumps, and when we're confident that the system is up and running and working, we'll do a comprehensive comms piece around the benefits. And just a little bit more around that. Building regulations will see certainly domestic gas come out of use by 2025, and it's always good to be ahead of that. So the Norwich New Home Standard, the heat strategy, will look to take gas out of use in the city ahead of building regulations. Obviously, we can't influence all house builders, but we do aim to act as leader there. And I think air source and ground source heat pump technology is mature, market ready. The warranties are good, the organisations that provide them are good, so it's really just about awareness raising and finance now. These are the remaining barriers. With the increase in the cost of gas, the differential cost between gas and electricity, the business case or the economic case for heat pumps is becoming much better, so we'll push that and make sure people understand that this option exists and that it's low risk.
Thank you for that. So I saw Gary again. Were you wanting to come in, Denise? Yeah, yeah, you have. I'll bring you in first then, because you've not spoken for a while.
So, a fantastic project and well done. And I don't know if there's scope for the City Council providing a consultancy role here and bringing in some income on that as well, because I think people, as Judith said, there's really a lot of questions people have around heat pumps and all the myths around them. But my question particularly is about the paragraph number 1. It said the heat pumps going to deliver up to 43% of the building's heating requirements. So I wondered about the other 57%, please. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that will actually be delivered by the new gas boiler. The reason being, when we looked at the building, because it was listed just the building limitations, we couldn't put in a completely renewable solution, and the funding as well. There wasn't enough there to put in a completely renewable solution. So the air source heat pump would be the primary source of heating. So if you've got a mild day, the gas boilers may not come on at all. You might just be using your air source. So it is to do with the climate at the time. And again, we've erred on the side of caution. But yeah, that's where your 57% comes from. That will be delivered by the boiler.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Very clear. Gary.
Sorry, I feel like I fumbled my last point. I don't feel I wasn't really clearly saying comms. What I was saying was communicating in regard. Last year there was a report where the government said there was about 4,000 installers in the country. Then, not long afterwards, the Independent Networks Association said, well, actually, there's only about 1,200. We've got a national shortage of qualified installers for these kind of for this kind of installation. You've got an exemplary project here, which could be a national example. You've got the UEA. You've got institutions like the University Technical College in Norwich, which you could reach out to. You've got young people wanting to move into different professions, more practical professions with apprenticeships. And I guess my point was, are we linking in with those kind of organisations to upskill our local community? If we're talking about joined up thinking, that's kind of where I was trying to gear that question, and I feel I phrased it poorly, and I don't know if I phrased it better there, but that's my better attempt.
I understand that perfectly. The strategy development work that's coming up this year will very much address the need for a green economy, and by that I mean a skilled workforce. who is able to deliver the step change that we need. Yes, there is a shortage. Actually, Norfolk, and Norwich in particular, has a long history in quite alternative energy and thinking. And when I came into sustainability, I ran a little NGO, and we did a self-build solar scheme, and it was the first time I came to Norwich, and we did 2 schemes here back in the year 2000, and Norwich was where we had most demand. So over time that has developed into quite a strong local installer base, and actually I've been operations manager for a couple of local renewable energy installation businesses. So we've got a good base to grow from. But you're right, we need to mobilise technical colleges, we need to get the people who have the experience in those organisations to become lecturers. Yes, we need to address that. And that's very much that will come through in our kind of retrofitting strategy development. But yes, that needs to happen. Understand.
Okay. If there are no more questions, then thank you, Martin, for the update and also for helping with the responses. It's a great piece of work. It's an exemplar. I imagine the press are watching this meeting anyway, so they might well pick up on this discussion anyway. And I think all the relevant points have been made, particularly. Excellent. Let's move on then, and we're now going to talk about the recent community engagement activities relating to biodiversity. Matt, are you here to speak to that? Because the report's in your name, isn't it?
It is in my name. Excuse me, I'm just going to leave it to Phil to get on with. It's giving a bit of extra work.
Right, okay.
But no, I think the report highlights the significant amount of work that officers have put into engagement which has taken place. I was at the engagement consultation at St Andrews, and it was really heartwarming to see so many different people and different groups there. The feedback we got from it was incredibly positive, and I think a key point of the session is also being able to link the different individuals and individual groups together, because there's so many people, so many groups doing different things within the city, kind of interlocking them where they can help each other and work with each other as well as the city. I think it's a very productive thing.
Excellent. Do you want to add to that, Phil?
Yeah, thank you. So the engagement events, both even during the COVID era, as strange as it's been, taking place at the halls, and also the subsequent digital engagement using a new platform that, and it was proof of concept for the new platform, which I think is a big tool. Is it Bangtan? Yeah. So the purpose of the consultation was as part of the evolution of the biodiversity strategy, and I think what it's proved is the value of community engagement, and particularly using a digital platform. And what's come out of that is that my team will enjoy its own digital platform that's linked to our website. We're about to do some website development work to bring focus to energy, carbon and biodiversity areas of what we do in affordable warmth, and there'll be a link to that, to a new sort of community engagement platform where we'll continue the good work that was started in November. So yes, what it's proved is that we have very engaging citizens, and also we hear this phrase in the press, and it's starting to become ever more kind of useful. We have citizen scientists. You know, we're a university city. A number of our citizens have ecology, academic knowledge, and they're offering that to us. And as part of the evolving biodiversity strategy, actually, mobilising members of the public who we hope will volunteer the use of their back gardens and nature corridors, etc. So we've started off on the right foot, which is going to the community first off and engaging with them, and that enables us to enlist their help in delivering the biodiversity strategy which is being written at the moment. So success.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good piece of work. Are there any questions? Ian?
Yes, thank you. Thank you again for the report. There's some really good feedback came from this. On the subject of citizen scientists, how do I become a citizen scientist? And how do I involve people in my ward who I know will be interested in joining projects? Please.
So I think the route to becoming a citizen scientist is to engage with the upcoming platform that we're putting together at the moment and registering your personal interests or the interest of your community groups. Our community engagement team hold a mailing list. We've got about something like 400 groups across all topic areas. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, it's 70 odd in the environmental sphere. So it's to register interest so that when we're planning activities or asking for assistance from the community, then you'll be in that communication flow.
Okay, thank you. So, so can you give me an example of the kind of projects that may be undertaken, and also are you looking for feedback, more feedback from members of the public for ideas for those projects?
I think the engagement is still, the digital engagement is still live, so that can be engaged with, and we're collecting new information from that all the time. So that's the big biodiversity conversation. So please feel free to engage with that and ask your people in your community to do so. That information is being collected and it's being analysed. My understanding is by a team of willing volunteers from UEA. So that we can kind of pick through and look at the stronger themes that come out of that. But there'll be a number of ways of engaging. We'll be talking to the sort of friends of type organisations around cemeteries and parks. And we'll be talking to members of the public generally about how they can engage with their whatever biodiversity or nature assets they have, which might be anything from window boxes to back gardens to whatever they have. That's coming together in the biodiversity strategy and action plan.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And just to comment to finish my question really is, I was pleased to see that there was opposition to the NDR Western Link.
Sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Yes, I was pleased to see that there is opposition to the NDR Western Link from from the input from this, because that is of course a danger to biodiversity on a big scale.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you. Great. Okay. Gary? Sorry, Judith. Sorry, I saw Judith first. I apologise.
Just to say, I was curious about numbers 3 and 4. General negativity about the council was low, and yet 4, there was anger aimed at NDR Western Link as well as transport more widely. Well, these people are presumably switched on. They know that councils are responsible for these things. These people weren't drawn from the city only, were they? I mean, there must have been people who lived in Broadland and South Norfolk and know that they are part of the county. So when you say general negativity about the council, are you just talking about Norwich City Council?
Good question.
Yes, in that case, yes, but you're right, absolutely. The people coming to that event were not limited by the district boundaries, but the specific picking up of that point was around Norwich City Council rather than any wider other district councils or county.
Just to go back to the other issue about how one gets engaged and sharing things. I mean, the idea of this group in Mount Pleasant, they suddenly thought of the idea of having a biodiversity street. Well, presumably, whatever they're going to do can be shared with other streets, and presumably it's something like, let's all try and do something with our front gardens and back gardens and any opportunity along that street to enhance biodiversity. And so it's a question of sort of pointing people in the direction of that online engagement so that they can engage with them. And to some extent, just us hosting that online means that we do not get so involved because they are sort of group to group. But you did ask how you get involved. Well, is it an email to Kate Price? Or, you know, where else in here is there any information about how you get onto that platform?
Is that information you can circulate to the group?
Yeah, because councillors are at the moment going around knocking on doors and talking to people about all sorts of things, and it's always nice to have a soft thing like this to talk about when if they complain about, you know, the lack of biodiversity, what you're doing about it, we can say, well, you know, try this for size.
Yeah, especially useful in Mount Pleasant.
So we'll put that in the minutes, Jackie's just said, okay, so we'll get that. Phil?
And the digital engagement platform, which will be linked from the web pages that my team will host, Get Talking Norwich, that's where there are 20 things you can do to improve biodiversity in your area. That's where that sort of information will be provided, and where case studies can be put up and shared, and there can be knowledge sharing happening there. That's the plan for that.
Good. So Gary next, and then Denise.
I've got a couple of points. So my first point is in relation to citizen science. I had the pleasure recently of going to the Owen Institute and working with Dr. Sam Rowe, who's their public engagement officer, on a citizen science exercise where we were trained up in DNA analysis, and then we could then go back into our communities to work with our communities to extend that knowledge. As you say, the city has got an excellent resource, knowledge and capacity to do that. And so just to answer anyone in here who is asking how they can get involved with that, the Urban Centre would be an excellent first port of call. I would recommend that, although I'm sure your portal is excellent. More importantly, or more on a different note, I was looking at this point where it says links to food poverty and sustainability were discussed. Given that we're about to hit a global food security crisis on a level that is unprecedented, I feel. Have we got strategy to deal with that? Have we got? Is there discussion to? And I know that's a ridiculously big question, but I feel like the last month, the global situation has changed. I mean, bird feed for wild birds is predominantly grown in Ukraine, so bird feed is going to become an issue, you know, and it's things like that. Have we got a strategy to address this upcoming disaster?
I was just going to reflect how many crises we are managing at the moment. Not specifically around food poverty. My team is in the early stages of putting together an emergency response to fuel poverty for next winter. I'll just say a couple of words about that, and we'll manage your first question. So we recognise that with the cost of gas increasing as it is, that there's very significant issues around well-being are likely to hit our people over the course of the next winter. And so what we're looking at the feasibility of purchasing simple insulation materials, loft insulation, draft proofing, in bulk, and supplying them at slightly below market rates, we're passing the cost on, the good cost that we get back. And mobilising through community engagement people to insulate their own homes. So that's something we have got coming together. I hadn't considered food poverty as an environmental area.
There's a wider food poverty group that is in existence, linked through into our community enabling team again, and networks across the city, bolstered, I think, ironically, by some of the issues around COVID. Obviously, more and more people getting involved in that, and so that community group has broadened out and is stronger than it was prior to COVID, to say ironically. So that's something that is in place and that we are engaged in. And there's wider work going on across the organisation as well to look at inequality and disadvantage in general and the impact of the cost of living crisis that we can pull together. So that's at early stages, but there's work going on.
Okay. Denise.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, I wanted to ask, please, about biodiversity expertise in-house. Norwich City Council, we once had a natural areas officer, but we no longer do. But biodiversity is obviously increasing in importance, for example, the statutory requirement shortly for biodiversity net gain. So I wondered how we're going to cover that. Will we be looking to appoint someone in-house? Will we be looking to link up with the adjoining districts, and or will we be looking to have a service level agreement with the county council? I really feel it would be very beneficial to have in-house expertise on biodiversity. There are so many areas where there are gaps.
Okay, thanks, Denise.
I think we certainly need in-house resource for managing biodiversity action. But I'm not convinced that there's a value for money case on having in-house expertise. And there may be a number of circumstances where we would be deemed to be not independent to be able to offer that advice. And that would be, for example, in the case of managing house building applications where the 10% net gain is required. And I think a good argument could be made in those circumstances that council, an in-house council expert would be inappropriate, and that expertise would need to be independent. So the way I'm moving forward at the moment is thinking, yes, we do need somebody to manage action, to coordinate that, and yes, they will need to have a background in environmental sciences. But when it comes to more sort of cutting edge, so to speak, academic knowledge, I think for both a value for money purposes and also for maintaining independence, we would probably ourselves be better to buy those in. And I think the way we're managing that in the strategy is the strategy will be premised on the need for evidence and science-based approach to biodiversity net gain. So we acknowledge that that's absolutely required, but we would leave it to, but we would seek the input from subject matter experts to tell us what that is. But I think having a full-time ecology expert probably wouldn't have enough work for them to justify a full-time position. That's my current thinking.
Adam, did you want to come in?
Yeah, a stupid question from me. Who handles our ecology reports on planning applications? Who do we procure them from?
I'm not sure actually. Does anyone know?
We think it is county. I think it is county.
County.
There's a discussion happening at officer level at the moment about where we do resource ecology expertise from. And I have a poor understanding of our relationship with county, but my market knowledge tells me is ecologists are about to get very, very busy, and we don't want to create a bottleneck in the processing of any sort of biodiversity information or action. So I'm keen to have perhaps a framework or to have recourse to independent experts as well as county. That's my current thinking. And I would say with UEA on our doorstep and a world-leading natural sciences department and some leading light academics, that my current plan is to source our expert knowledge from UEA.
planning applications?
No, not for planning applications.
Yes,
But-
and I think it's very hit and miss in terms of government control, whether biodiversity is law.
I'm sorry, from the end of 2023, there would be a statutory requirement to generate 10% net gain. And so how I'm managing that in the strategy is to ensure that there is an evidence and science-based approach, pending a conversation with my colleagues in planning, but that would seem to be an important way to ensure that net gain is achieved.
I've been prompted by Jackie, who services the planning committee, and she said that...
Might be wrong.
Oh, no, you're never wrong, Jackie. That an applicant who wanted to have an independent ecology report would pay for it themselves. So basically they could pay for an independent report to go along with the report going to committee. So it's years since I was on planning, but apparently that's the case. Okay, well, thank you for that report. Oh, Matt. Go on, Matt.
Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to thank councillors for taking this as an agenda item tonight. It's obviously incredibly important. Just very briefly, I'd like to think we all have the same view of thoughts that councillors and the council must do all that we can to protect and enhance the city's biodiversity. For example, I'm assuming that the councillors at this meeting agree that we should all do all we can to protect the city's trees, that they can only be removed or cut back based on the council's tree policy, which I'm sure all of the councillors are aware of and hopefully support. I mention this briefly because I've been contacted by local residents who are concerned about what they thought appeared to be vandalism of trees near the Market Community Centre, with some being cut back. After looking into this, it was incredibly disappointing that the trees in question had been commissioned by the local community group to be cut back, and that this happened despite clear statement of city council officers that the group was not to have any work carried out on the trees. The minutes of the committee meeting demonstrated that the committee was aware that the trees did not meet the requirements of the council's policy for action to be taken, and that the trees in question do not belong to the community centre. Surprisingly and disappointingly, the leader of the Green Party, Councillor Galvin, who still is on the committee, according to the minutes which I've seen, did not appear to make any attempt to stop the work going ahead. In fact, the minutes noted that the committee agreed to go ahead with the work, having been told by an NTC officer that action was not to be taken. They requested a member of the group to approach a tree surgeon, having already received 3 quotes for the work. I was surprised and disappointed at Councillor Galvin's involvement in the deliberate damage to these trees, particularly as she has regularly stated that she wishes to protect the city's biodiversity. We'll leave it to others to decide for themselves whether this reflects a degree of hypocrisy. I would hope councillors at this meeting all agree that residents, groups, and councillors must follow the guidelines we apply to protect the city's trees, and only have work carried out on council trees, which is authorised by the council.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So I think that's something that you need to raise outside the meeting, Matt, with relevant parties. Gary.
Well, my initial point was, you've just summarised my point. That needs to be raised with the relevant parties. I don't feel it was pertinent to the council. I would like to say that I very much look forward to the biodiversity strategy finally coming through this year in June. And we've been waiting a long time for this. And hopefully the proof will be in the pudding, and that there's a lot of promises for June, aren't there? There's going to be a joined up strategy for waste, joined up strategy for biodiversity. It's a brave, brave time we live in, and I'm thankful to the cabinet members, and I'm thankful to all the councillors for their cooperation and collaboration to allow this to happen, because this is more than party politics. What we're talking about is the survivability of our planet. And so, for me, this isn't about partisan tiff. This is about securing the future for our children. And so I just want to thank all those involved for the work that they've done, because it's commendable, and I look forward to working with you all further.
Thank you, Gary. Let's move on, shall we? Let's move on to item, and thank you to the officers for presenting that report, and Councillor Packer for attending for it as well. Thank you. So, item 7, this is the update on climate risks to Norwich City Council. There's a report on page 41, and which officer is going to present this? Oh, hi.
Hi. This report just gives an update on the work that we've been doing to identify climate risks for Norwich City Council. So we've been looking across all service areas to identify these risks. So we've done quite a lot of analysis kind of behind the scenes using the UK climate impact projections, using the climate change risk assessment for England. And from that, we've considered the main risks to be surface water flooding and increased heat waves. This obviously then presents risks to properties in the city and to community health, particularly in periods of increased heat. This work has been reflected in the Q3 Combined Assurance Quarterly Report, and that was approved by Cabinet on the 23rd of February. In terms of specific risks for service areas, I won't read them all out because there's quite a list, but those are in paragraphs 6 to 8 on pages 42 and 43 of the report. And then, so currently work is underway to finalise the risk scoring and the action plans, and that will make sure that the risk sits at the appropriate areas and on the appropriate risk registers, and we expect this to be complete in time for Q4 reporting. And overall, this work will allow climate risk to inform the overall work of the directorates and bring a greater level of climate awareness to the risk registers. And of course, any risks that are included on service registers will be reviewed quarterly in line with current risk procedures.
Brilliant, thank you. So, have we got any comments or questions, please? Yes, Denise?
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, the risk register, as it's described in relation to climate change, looks to manage one-off events as they occur, rather than seeking to reduce risk impacts in advance. How can the risk register be used to inform a climate change adaptation strategy and action plan which seeks to reduce those risks? And my second question is, does the risk register need to recognise external events to local citizens beyond the risks posed to council services, for example to water, food supplies, disruptions to the local economy, increased inward migration from people on the move due to climate change, possible relocation of communities from Norfolk's coastline? How far ahead should the risk register plan for the disruptions and dislocation which will be inevitable if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees? Thanks.
Both, I'm sure Phil will come in if there's anything I've missed. Just in terms of that second point about the external risks, obviously for our risk register we're looking for things that are going to specifically impact council services and therefore risks that we can mitigate. So we are aware of those more longer term risks, but we don't feel that they need to be on the risk register immediately, just because there's not much in terms of the mitigation that we can do at this very moment. And then the first point was on short-term risks versus long-term risks, if I'm right?
Yes, it's about rather than dismanaging one-off events, looking to reduce the risks of the impacts.
Yeah, so again, as part of our sort of scoring exercise, we're looking at those risks, and those that we think score appropriately will sort of escalate up the register. So for a lot of them, we are aware of them, but it's not necessarily appropriate for them to be on the corporate risk register at this moment, because we don't feel they're at that point yet. So it's just really working in line with sort of corporate risk policies. I don't know if you've got anything to add in, Phil.
So it's an ongoing piece of work, and we've arrived at a place where we have defined a set of risks and a set of mitigating actions. But it doesn't stop there. So I was speaking recently with chap that runs the Tyndall Centre at UEA, actually who's co-chair of the Climate Commission, about some of the very long-term forecasting, 2050, 2080, according to a number of climate change scenarios. And so we are starting to see really leading-edge research on the impacts to Norwich, and it's down to kilometres square. It's high-resolution work. So as that information comes through to us a little bit more formally, we'll include that into our risk mitigation and into the risk register. But I would say that actually East Anglia, all the places around the planet, is actually pretty steady in long-term climate change scenarios. And even looking at the 2050, 2080 in excess of 1.5 degrees, it really wasn't as bad as I thought it might be. And I think 2080, to give you an example, I appreciate I won't go into a little bit more detail, but the worst case scenario, they modeled 4 degrees 2080, there was something like 20 heat-related deaths a year, and of course, deaths are really good. But it wasn't quite the worst case scenario that I thought could come out of that exercise. So I'm just saying to say, yes, we are keeping an eye on really good academic information, long-term forecasting, and as that comes through through more formal routes, it'll come through government, then we'll build that into our risk analysis.
Thank you. Okay, Gary.
I would love to have a conversation where I'm being told that in 2080 there'll be, how many deaths did you just say? 20?
20 heat-related.
20 heat-related deaths. I would genuinely love to come to the UEA with you and get involved in that conversation, because, well, I find it pretty far-fetched. I do genuinely find that quite far-fetched.
Do you think it's lower than you thought?
Because it's significantly lower than I thought. Purely in relation to the fact that all the data I've seen is that we're going to be, that's 4 degrees, that's based on a 4-degree temperature increase.
I understand, yes.
Okay. Could like in all genuineness, can I ask if I could have a conversation with the source? I would be very curious to see the source of that information and have a conversation if I may.
Shall I get the slides?
Well, yeah, please do. I would love to. I guess my concern with this entire bit of this agenda piece is this committee was set up as to respond to the climate emergency. I don't feel when I'm reading this, and I feel there's a genuine emergency within relation to the climate and the ecological crisis which is ongoing. And that we're just addressing what the council runs. Should we not be looking at the wider issues of what's going to affect the people of Norwich? We're talking about everything was joined up until we got to this point. Sorry, I don't mean to get all impassioned.
Well, I think the point is, it is climate risks to Norwich City Council, not climate risk to Norwich City. It is actually specific. That's the nature of the beast. That's what we're discussing.
I would add as well that this is not the only part of the picture. There are pieces of work that we talked about already. There's the work of the Climate Commission and under the City Vision Group. There's other pieces of work being done to look at some of those wider pictures. But as the chair says, this specific piece of work is around risk to us specifically. So that's why it's limited. But as I say, the work the planned work that we've got that Phil's talked through. And the work of the Climate Commission is getting into some of those bigger issues. So it's one part of the puzzle, I guess, is the point.
Yeah, we do have to assess risks to the council, and that will be a discrete particular piece of work, and that's what we're looking at the moment.
Can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
Yes, I really would be mortified to have it minuted that I have made a statement that I don't think that we have a climate and environmental emergency. I've set out my career in this area because I very much believe and stay abreast with good science that that's why I'm here. what I was giving was an impression that we are close to good quality information as it's being generated, and that will feed into the ongoing development of our risk analysis. But I wouldn't want to limit it that I was downplaying an emergency. But I'd be happy to share that information.
Yeah, lovely. I mean,
yeah, we can take that outside the meeting.
Yeah,
but it's clear, Phil, that you were quoting.
Yes.
You were quoting science, and we may well not be happy with what it says, but that's a conversation outside the meeting. So, Adam.
I was just going to say, if the source of that information could be shared with the whole committee. I mean, I'm not normally a member of the committee, but that'd be great. Thanks.
Denise?
Just to say that when an emergency occurs, people look to the City Council as the leader, and that was very apparent in COVID. City Council didn't just deal with its own services, it actually addressed services to citizens more widely, and I think that also applies to climate change, and so that's why I'm concerned that the risk register just focuses on council services, because I think the issue goes far beyond City Hall doors.
Just to say, Denise,
yeah.
That's what this piece of work is, and it's a piece of work that needs to be done, which is around council services to our residents. It's about our responsibility for this organisation. So that is a piece of work that needs to be done. It doesn't mean to say that there isn't other work being done, and it doesn't mean to say that we don't want to be a leader.
No.
But I think it's important to understand the context, that this is a specific piece of work, assessing the risk to the council and its services of climate change, as we do many other risks to the council and its services. So just important to keep it in that context.
That's right, although with COVID, for example, there was also an issue about buying in food, people's difficulty in buying in food, and that's certainly going to be the case with climate emergency disrupting food supplies. And in relation to 4 degrees, if Norfolk is not going to suffer so badly as other areas, we would just see huge influxes of inward migrants.
Right, and actually the migration was part of the work, so let's take a look at that. Yes, again, I mean, thank you for pointing out that this is a report of a very specific, a piece of work with a very well-defined scope. It has to be acknowledged that a wider piece around Norwich in more general terms will be required. Of course.
Okay. Ian.
Thank you. So just to cover that again, the suggestion is that by 2080, did you say there would be 20?
I think I would share that.
Heat-related deaths. I think that's a huge number for a small city. I think that really is something to be worried about, and I can't agree that would be a good news scenario, because that would be replicated across the entire country. That would be a huge number of people. Presumably it's quite low currently, so I think that data probably will turn out to be credible, but there is a real concern even at those levels. I think that's catastrophic.
I think I'm cutting my teeth not very well at my first committee meeting, and I'll source that.
I think we need to share the information, don't we? And then we can discuss it again in a more informed way.
The point I was making, I don't doubt the credibility of that source material.
Okay. Fine. Let's move on then to the final item on the agenda. And thank you, Phil, for presenting, and do it also. And thanks also to Rachel. Harry?
I was just going to ask one thing, just one on the council-related, on that agenda point. One of the first things I did when I got elected last year was I had training in relation to emergency scenarios, and apparently as councillors, one of our jobs is to coordinate our local wards so that if there was a disaster scenario, that we would be fully equipped and knowledgeable about what to do. The main disasters which were outlined are the same disasters outlined in here, which are about flash flooding and heat wave scenarios. And is there in this, I didn't know, is there any upskilling of councillors so that we are able to help coordinate our local communities to communicate with the council? I sometimes feel that a little bit disjointed, and that might be my lack of skill as a new councillor. Maybe everyone else is far more plugged in and joined in, but I sometimes feel like if there was a genuine disaster in my ward, that I wouldn't really know on the flip of a switch where to look. And a lot of there's a direct correlation between the issues outlined in here and the issues which were outlined in that disaster training. And so I felt it was a personal point, and I apologise for when you were tying up there to say that, but I felt it was worth saying out loud.
We have, as you have seen, there's a risk in there about increased sort of emergency situations. I haven't seen the detail of that risk yet and the mitigations to that, which presumably would include something around additional training for councillors, but we can come back and let you know about that. We can catch up with the team who are drafting that risk now and let you know, but I don't know the detail of that unless so we can take that away and come back.
Thank you. I just thought it was worth saying out loud that it's minuted and it can be brought up again in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to item 8 now. Then that's the update on funding bids. And is that?
That's me again.
Okay.
I know there's a couple in there, so I'll try and be brief on each one. So our first funding bid update is the Sustainable Warmth Competition, which is a 3.1 million funding grant from central government to retrofit 200 private sector homes. That will deliver until March 2023. And there is some more detail in the report there, specifically about the savings we expect it to deliver and who we'll be targeting. In terms of that funding timeline, this was accepted into the capital programme on February 22nd, and we approved the award of the contract to E.ON via the Fusion 21 Energy Efficiency Framework on February 23rd. We're now just in the stage of finalising that contract, having a legal look at it and make sure that's all okay before we can start contacting residents. We hope pretty soon to start working on income verification and getting those works done. The second one is the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is also a grant from central government. That's an overall pot of 1.25 million. 2/3 of that is coming from a grant and 1/3 is coming from us, from the HRA budget, which has sort of already been approved, and that's specifically for social housing. So Sustainable Warmth is looking at the private sector, and the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is looking at our own stock. And again, that was accepted into the budget March 9th Cabinet, and we're currently in the process of looking at contract award, hoping to take a further report to Cabinet in April regarding that one. And then the third one is the Heat Network Zone pilot programme, which I think Phil briefly mentioned at the very start of the meeting, but it's been a while, so I'll go over it again. So heat network, for those of you that might not know, it's also known as district heating. It supplies heat from a central source to consumers via a network of underground pipes carrying hot water. And then a heat network zone is an expansion of that, and it's an area where heat networks are considered to be the lowest cost, lowest carbon solution for decarbonising heating. And currently central government is looking at bringing in legislation around heat network zones, and that might include expanded powers for local authorities to designate areas where builds have to then connect onto those heat networks. And as part of that, BASE are working on a model to identify heat network zones and then testing that model against local knowledge. Norwich has been identified as one of the pilot cities for those models, so we're at the process of working with consultants to identify local stakeholders, local data, to hopefully build that model to identify where heat network zones may be placed in the city. And just to say on that one, that's trialling and testing identifications of zones and modelling. It's not installation of network in the city, although we hope it will give us a good knowledge base, a good database. There won't be any installations directly coming from this work. And then the final one is the EV charging pilot, the Charge Collective pilot, which is a partnership between us, Norfolk County Council and UK Power Networks. And that's aimed at increasing the number of electric vehicle charging points on street parking in the city. So they've identified a number of places in the city which we think would be good candidates for this, and this is about helping people who already own vehicles moving into electric vehicle ownership rather than increasing overall car ownership in the city. And that's currently sitting with our procurement at County Council, and they're just working on a tender, and we're hoping for that to go out to procurement very shortly, and then we'll get installers in to actually do the works. And apologies, I know that's a lot of different funding bids and a lot of different points, but there's a lot in there, so I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Ian, I saw first.
Yes, thank you for the report. There's some really good projects in here once again, so some excellent stuff to report. One of the things that I am asked about the most when I'm knocking on doors, especially in the areas where there is high car ownership and a lack of parking. It used to be about parking, but now it's about what can I do if I want to have if I wanted to switch to an electric car. So this is good news for them. However, is there going to be enough capacity with this particular project, and is there a finite time scale we can put on this? Please.
So in terms of capacity, there will be an increased capacity. I don't think it will be enough capacity for everyone in the whole city. It's sort of, as we've said, a pilot here, and we're putting in extra capacity and hoping we can build on that and continue with that. I believe the funding, I think it runs until October, the pilot, so that's the timeline that we're expecting for that.
Can I just follow up on that as well? Have we been looking at, as well as street devices on the street level, have we been looking at our own land for installing these, so such as existing garages and or parking spaces, of which we know that many are available?
Rachel. I've identified the need for an EV charging strategy, actually, which is quite a succinct document. And yes, we do recognise that we need increased charging capacity, and I'll come back to an interim measure that the county has put in place. And there's also a commercial opportunity here for the council to generate revenue streams. So certainly, there's a communication that is due to go out, if it hasn't already, bringing notice to the fact that the county council members fund can be used to deploy EV charging points in community centres and council-owned buildings, and that's for £10,000 a year. So that's something that can be put into place straight away. Obviously, there's a little bit of work that needs to be done to look at the feasibility. There needs to be, for example, ideally a 32 amp breaker on the board in the community centre, things like that. There are technical constraints. But we recognise that in our car parks and land, garages, as you say, that we do need to increase EV charging capacity. The interim measure, and that will be written into a strategy that can be used in our parks and open spaces car parks. It can be used in our town centre car parks. It will have a number of applications, that particular strategy. The interim measure the county has put in place is that they've deemed it acceptable that members of the public can run a charge cable across their pavement as long as it's sufficiently protected by one of those kind of rubber cable protectors you see in offices. On the proviso that they notify county that they have done that, and I believe there's an online, there's provision of an online resource for doing that. So there's an interim measure that's going to be in place for 2 years. It will be kept under review. They'll be monitoring the amount of sign up to that, which helps to determine the demand for EV charging. The pilot that Rachel has given us a report on is in high density areas of the city. They're on street, and it's really been to look at how UK power networks, because this requires grid strengthening, county and city can work together in partnership to identify suitable places. So it's about putting those working relationships in place. And off the top of my head, I can't remember how many sites we've identified, 40, 50, something like that. It's a sizable number. And as Rachel says, that's sitting with county to procure and install a service provider to install, manage, maintain those charging points. That answers your question.
Okay, so did you want to come in on that point?
Yes, just on that point, I have seen other local authorities provide charging points, but not provide space on the street for the car. Anybody can park in the street, so when you're desperate to recharge your car, you can't get to the point because the place is not free. So it really has to be joined up, that it has to be a charging point on the ground, so that the car can get to the point. And I have seen other occasions when city and county haven't worked well together. So it's down to the really sort of detail of what's needed, and not just a charging point, but it does have to be accessible.
We have discussed that. It's quite a thorny issue. The way I managed it quite successfully at UEA was to create an informal EV user group who communicated with each other by means of social media messaging. And they really successfully managed the small number of EV charging points between them. And so our initial approach is to encourage engagement, community cohesion through the setting up of local EV groups. And yes, that doesn't answer all of the questions, people coming from out of town who aren't members of those groups. But I do see that as a potential additional benefit, that it brings people who may not necessarily talk to each other very often into contact, but we're keeping an eye on that. And that's our current kind of working hypothesis. But I agree that it does need good join up.
Okay, so I've got Kate. Did you have your hand? And then Adam, and then I think it's Gary, and then Denise.
I just wanted more information about the electric vehicle point, so that's sort of pretty much covered. But just to say that during lockdown, with the WhatsApp groups that were set up per road, some of them that I'm stood on really nice, helpful, friendly spaces, and quite often they're asking people to just move their cars, but I'm sure that would translate easily into, can I have a car on electric?
And when there's a parking order on the street, I notice it's popular.
Yeah, it's hard when people actually look at each other. It means you look away from the microphone and you don't talk, so we can't hear it.
We missed it. Well, I missed it.
Yeah, I was just saying about the WhatsApp groups, Jackie, that would set up, road groups set up, and how that could lend itself to people communicating about whose turn it is to use the electric vehicle point. Because we've created these little micro communities per road or slightly beyond, so it does facilitate that kind of communication.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next was Gary and then Denise. Oh, sorry, Adam. Go on, Gary.
I guess my point is in relation to the joined up thinking, it's echoing other people's points in a lot of ways. And my local ward, there's a car which I was trying to report the other day because it's been parked there for like over a month in front of somebody's house, but it's registered, it's not, and because of the way the parking permits finish right through the middle of my ward, it means that people will park in the permit-free areas, which then mean that the issues which Judith was pointing out before would be very severe, I think. And I'm not entirely convinced. I'm not convinced that it would work. I'm not convinced that people will be able to park outside their own house to charge. And maybe there's alternative ways of, I don't know, is there ways of having your car sync to a different charging point and having it charged so it doesn't have to come from your particular charging point? Other alternative methods which have been tested or piloted out there?
The on-street.
Yeah.
So the two approaches proposed are charge outside your own house by means of a cable, and obviously that cable might be able to go a few spaces either way, because parking outside our own house is often a challenge in high density areas. And the on-street charges, I'd have to come back to the brief. There is a rationale for where they're located with regards to parking place. And as you might have gathered during the session, covering a lot of ground with not a lot of people, so I haven't got the chapter and verse on it. No, quite. It's a very reasonable question. There has been some thinking done around that, but it is a thorny issue. Certainly the on-street charging facilities will be determined by the service provider that provides them, but it will be a card payment, sort of, or mobile phone-based payment device. But it doesn't stop people parking in the bays long term, and that is a recognised issue, and that's, yes, we need to do some more thinking on that. There isn't nationally an obvious solution to that, other than improving the way people communicate with each other.
We do have car club bays, and that has been quite successful. Nobody else can park in those bays because they're for the car clubs, and they're lit across the city. But I think if you don't have a designated bay that goes with the electric charge that's been paid for by the county, it's, you know, I just fear it's not going to be used.
They are designated bays. There's just nothing to stop people extending their stay. That's my understanding.
Oh, I see. So they might park there all day. They might charge, but leave it there all day. Well, then that's a big problem, isn't it? It is a big problem.
My understanding is that they are.
Oh, they're designated. Fine, because that was what didn't happen in Islington, I think it was.
Right. So, right, so I've got Adam, and then I've got Denise, and then I've got Ian.
Thanks. Yes, no, it's a stupid question for me, I'm afraid. It seems like with the levels of investment the government are putting in, the infrastructure that needs to be in place for the EV revolution is going to take a long, long time to be implemented. And it seems an area of the city of which we have a lot, which only have which don't have off-street parking. We're going to have a lot of cables going across footpaths, and my sort of pointing the obvious out is what coordination is there between the county council as the highways authority with the Norwich Access Group, etc. Norwich, blind, deaf community, etc. Because it's all right for us, we can just step over a cable, but if you're in a wheelchair or etc. So that's my point anyway. I know it's stating the obvious, but I felt like it needed to be said.
No, it's not stating the obvious. It's a real issue around the city, and some of the cables, some of the heights people have to get over, they can't manage it in a buggy or a wheelchair. So there are issues that have been raised before.
We take that point. That is being managed by county, but it's a very important point. And so we have a meeting every 2 weeks with county traffic strategy people, and we'll raise that with them.
Sorry, can I just come in quickly on that one and say that as the working group, we're also aware of that Motability are releasing some standards towards the end of the month around EV charging, and we're going to be having a look at that and seeing how we can build that in as well. So it is an issue that has been discussed. Actually, the last group meeting we spent a good half hour, 45 minutes thinking about it. So it is something we're aware of, and as you say, it's a very important point to bring up for us to remember.
Yeah, I think the point is they need to be not too steep. They need to be gradual.
I think what we're saying is that there needs to be a specification for a cable protector that meets the needs of people with accessibility.
Okay, so
if I may, I'll be really brief. Sorry?
Is it on that point?
Yeah, it is. I've seen a couple of councils where they had a cable trough that then mitigated. You didn't need that, and you could lay your cable through the trough. It meant that there wasn't the accessibility issue that can arise from having it, and it also meant that people who possibly aren't in a position to lay it in the first place and then remove it, because there would be access issues with that in and of itself. I'm sure I can find the link somewhere and forward it to you. But I thought I'd say it again, just to be on the record.
All solutions gratefully received. Thank you.
Denise?
A question, Chair, well, several questions about sustainable warmth. So I don't know if you've got another question about EV before we move on to sustainable warmth.
Yes, I have, thank you. Just following up, one of the inquiries I had earlier this week was from somebody in a second floor flat in Town Close who would like to have an EV. So once again, I hope that we'll be looking at some other, it would be a long cable, it would probably be quite dangerous. So,
well, you need a flying EV car, don't you? That's what you need.
You do, or platform parking spaces. I'm hoping, of course, that we can look at the commercial element of this, and of course, for people overstaying, if we have our own spaces, then they can be charged nominally, but on a sessional basis with a penalty for overstaying. I wondered if that's possible with some kind of restriction on the public highway as well.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's an area that the procurement exercise of the county is essentially an assessment of what is available on the market, what solutions exist. So when they have received bids to provide the, however many there are, 40 or 50 in Norwich, we'll have a better idea about what technology exists and how it can be used. I don't want to sound negative, but there are a lot of barriers to EV charging. It's electric vehicles. We using grid electricity, the carbon intensity of which has halved in the last 20 years because we've got fantastic national policies that have developed wind farms in the North Sea and lots of PV on houses, and we're world leading. And electric vehicles would seem to be a very obvious transition away from fossil fueled vehicles. But actually, there's a number of really significant barriers, not least that we have a national grid that now has to meet the challenges of electrifying heat as we transition away from gas and electrifying transport. And there's constraints there. So I fear that although we seek the best solutions that exist, the actual rollout of EVs is, and I hope I'm proved wrong, and we'll try and prove ourselves wrong, but it's going to be quite slow. And so, especially in an urban environment, we're really keen to make sure that other forms of low impact transport are given equal weight. Walking, cycling, other health bringing means of transport, localisation of resources so that people don't have to resort to car use as the norm, are also important elements of the transport strategy.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting when you sit in certain committees like the Transport for Norwich Committee and you hear rural councillors from a party not represented here speak as if EVs are the solution to all our ills in terms of climate change and mean that we can just carry on regardless and just all switch to EVs. It's remarkable that and then you get pushback against cycling and walking measures, and clearly EVs are not the solution. Actually, it is about reducing car use very, very much, more sustainable forms of transport. But I think, fortunately, here in this council, we all get it, and we're all on the same page as far as that's concerned. Okay, so I think the final person I've got is Ian.
I've just been chair.
Say that again.
I've just had my question answered.
Oh, right, thank you, sorry. So who else? All right, Denise.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I've got some questions about sustainable warmth key to Rachel. Yes, the grant obviously is very welcome, but the government's cap on costs, it raises quite a lot of issues because the money on offer isn't going to go very far. It's set at maximum average of £10,000 for own-occupied homes and £5,000 for rented properties. So a number of questions then. I wonder, will the grant be expected to cover the surveys and initial surveys and assessments? And then do you think that the sums will probably cover traditional measures such as insulation, internal insulation and secondary glazing rather than low carbon heating measures such as heat pumps? My other question, how many properties come into the E, F and G bands in Nelson, Stewell and Wenson wards? And how will you encourage landlords who rent properties in those bands to upgrade the energy performance of their properties when the cost cap is set at £5,000 for rented properties and they're expected to contribute 1/3 of the overall costs? And finally, will the council consider helping owner-occupiers and properties rated EPC band D to upgrade to band C, E? And then I just got another question about the heat network zones pilot, which is going to produce lots of fascinating data. So I wondered if we could have a report back sometime on how the work is going or has gone. Because I think probably, I wonder if we can provide a springboard to area-wide retrofitting. It's going to provide lots of useful data. Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
I think I've jotted down most of them, but if it gets to the end I haven't answered, please let me know. So in terms of the survey work, that is included in the grant, but the grant also has, so it's the 10K is kind of for the capital works, and then there's also a separate ancillary budget for each property. So that will be covered, but it's not part of the 10K, it's 10K plus survey costs. I believe the second point was around low carbon heating measures versus insulation. In the main, we're going to be focusing on insulation measures. However, we'll be putting in some solar PV in some properties, but that's not the main target. It's included, but it's not the bulk of the work. And then the third one specifically on Nelson, Sewell and Wenson wards, I'm afraid I don't know that off the top of my head, but it's data that we can easily find out and circulate to you. In terms of landlords, as you say, they can often provide a challenge, so we are hoping to be targeting landlords as well, and basically we'll just be having lots of ongoing conversations with them and also with our private sector housing team in terms of a bit of a carrot and stick as well. So those properties where actually they've been told they have to do the works, we can sort of provide this as an avenue to do that, and that's what we've done in previous places and we found that quite useful. And then the final point is on D properties. So as part of the grant conditions, there's a cap on the amount of D properties that we can do. So we're not going to be targeting them initially. We're going to be looking mainly at those E, F and Gs, but if while we're in the area we mop up some Ds at the same time, we're more than happy to include them, but there is a cap there. And then is that sort of cover the sustainable warmth. And then in terms of the heat network zone, we'll get a final report from the consultants sort of around in June time, so we'll be more than happy to come back and give an update on that for sure.
Brilliant, thank you. We are approaching 2 hours, folks, so yeah, Phil.
Probably just 30 seconds. I just wanted to acknowledge the scale of the exercise that is required to assure affordable warmth and reduce carbon emissions from not only the council-owned buildings, including our homes, but across society in general. What we are more in control of is our own buildings, including homes, and we are modelling what the cost and how we might finance full-scale treatment of houses and all of our buildings. So we acknowledge the scope and the scale of the exercise that is past. We're engaging with that. And I just wanted to come back on a technical point, which is fabric first, which means reducing energy need. First of all, avoiding it, which is more of a behaviour thing, but then reducing energy need through energy efficiency, and then treating any remaining energy requirements with renewable energy. So it's a fabric first strategy. That is the approach that you'll see taken by government council and all of our kind of strategic thinking goes in that direction. So yes, that's watch this space.
And on that note, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. It's just coming up to 6:30, so we're up to the 2 hours we do need to conclude, but I think we've come to a natural conclusion. So thank you, everybody. And